So let's talk about how to report prize money on taxes. So here's an overview I want you to pay attention to. So first of all, can you claim gambling losses on your taxes? The answer is the answer is it really depends. Okay, so you can actually deduct your gambling losses, but you can only do so to offset the income from your gambling winnings. Okay, you cannot deduct your losses without reporting any winnings, and the amount of gambling losses you can deduct can never exceed the winnings you report as income. And so to report your gambling losses, you must actually itemize your income tax deductions on Schedule A. And if you claim the standard deduction, then you cannot reduce your tax by actually your gambling losses. It's really important to remember that you have to itemize. And the IRS doesn't permit you to subtract your losses from your winnings and report the difference on your tax return. You must report your winnings and losses separately. So that kind of separation is kind of important for when it comes to actually managing your taxes as they relate to casino winnings and losses. So let's talk about claiming gambling losses. Now, gambling losses are indeed tax deductible, but only to the extent, as I said just a few minutes ago, of your winnings. And this requires you to report all the money you win as taxable income on your return. And so the deduction is only available if you itemize your deductions. And if you claim the standard deduction, what will happen here is that you're going to have to actually apply those losses, those gambling losses to other years. So for this current year, if you actually have the standard deduction, then you cannot actually deduct your gambling losses. And one thing I want to say also is that when we talk about gambling losses, I'm only talking to you about the federal aspect of things. There are also some state tax consequences to be aware of, and every state has different tax rules for how they want to manage, how they want to handle gambling losses. So please, you want to actually consult with the tax specialist, or you can call the tax authorities in your state, even in your county. I mean, there are some counties like New York, for instance, where you're paying actually taxes not only at the federal level, but also at the state level and also at the city level, and in some cases at the county level. So long story short, when we talk about gambling losses, you can only deduct if you itemize your deductions, but also only to the extent that you have gambling winnings. By the way, boss, welcome back to the show. It's really a pleasure to have you here. Make yourself comfortable. You are going to enjoy today's conversation. Now let's talk about keeping track of your winnings and losses. So the IRS requires you to keep a log of your winnings and losses as a prerequisite to deducting losses from your winnings, okay? And your winnings include each win during the year. So each single win during the year. So you typically cannot offset your winnings from one day with your losses from another day in order to report your net winnings or losses. Your winnings and losses typically need to be separated and reported individually, and the IRS does allow you to net your wins and losses on the same day for the same type of wagering if you meet certain requirements. This means that if you win all the slots one day and loses the next day, you have to report the winnings on your tax returns as income and then deduct the losses separately as an itemized deduction. And so typical sources of winnings and losses can include lotteries, for instance. You have raffles, you have horse and dog races, you have casino games, you have poker games, you have sports betting, and so on and so forth. And your records need to include the date and type of gambling you engage in. This is really important. The IRS is really methodical about this, and they want granularity here. They want details, okay? So your records need to include the date and type of gambling you engage in, actually the name and address of the places where you gamble, the people you gambled with, the amount you win and lose, and other documentation to prove your losses can include Form W2G, Form 5754, wagering tickets, canceled checks or credit records, and receipts from the gambling facility. Now, when I talk about the gambling facility, this is kind of important. And the IRS wants to have all kinds of details, okay? They want to have the EIN, the employer identification number of the gambling facility. They want to know, again, as I said earlier, with whom you gambled, so they have a clear idea of what kind of gambling partnership you are in, if any. And also, one thing I need to make sure that you have is that when you talk about details, you need to have written details, okay? You have to have paper to actually prove your winnings. I mean, the IRS can accept electronic documents, but most importantly, it's better to have paper to keep a paper trail. By the way, boss, I want to quickly remind you of today's topic. We are having a conversation about prize money, casino winnings and losses, and their tax implications. So let's talk about the limitations on loss deductions. I think I've said this before. So the amount of gambling losses you can deduct can never exceed the winnings you report as income, right? Let me give you an example. If you have, let's say, $5,000 in winnings, but $8,000 in losses, your deduction is limited to $5,000. You could not write off the remaining $3,000 or carry it forward to future years. You could not. And let's talk about reporting gambling losses. Now, to report your gambling losses, you must itemize. I think I've already established that. You must itemize your income tax deductions, and you use a Schedule A for that. And you will typically itemize deductions if your gambling losses plus other itemized expenses are greater than the standard deduction for your filing status. So if you claim the standard deduction, you are still obligated to report and pay taxes on all winnings you earn during the year. You will not be able to deduct any of your losses, okay? And so one thing I want to say here is that we are speaking about only gambling losses. It's important to specify that. So you can include in your gambling losses the actual cost of wagers plus other expenses connected to your gambling activity, including travel to and from a casino. Keep in mind that the IRS does not permit you to simply subtract your losses from your winnings and report the difference on your tax return, okay? And if you have a particularly unlucky year, you cannot just deduct your losses without reporting any winnings. So if the IRS allowed this, then it's essentially subsidizing taxpayer gambling. So the bottom line is that losing money at a casino or the racetrack does not by itself reduce your tax bill. And so you must first report all your winnings before a loss deduction is available as an itemized deduction. Therefore, at best, deducting your losses allows you to avoid paying tax on your winnings, but nothing more. So it's one of those things where if you are unclear about what I just said, please let us know in the comment section. You can ask questions, and one of our team members will get back to you and answer all the questions that you have. Or you can just have an expert do your taxes for you. You can contact tax preparation services like TurboTax or Jackson Hewitt to kind of help you out. It's totally fine. Or you can use software to do your taxes too. So you have all kinds of possibilities. Let me give you a few pro tips here. It's really important to understand that if you're trying to really report your losses and your gains, you want to pay attention to some documents, to some forms that are really important. For example, you have a Form W-2G. So both cash and the value of prices are considered other income on your Form 1040. So if you score big, you might even receive a Form W-2G reporting your winnings. So the tax code requires institutions that offer gambling to issue Forms W-2G if you win $600 or more on a horse race if the win pays at least 300 times the wager amounts, $1,200 or more at bingo or on a slot machine, $1,500 or more at Keno, and $5,000 or more in a poker tournament, okay? And it's one of those things where you have to always, again, keep compliant with your tax obligations. Now, table games in a casino, such as blackjack, roulette, baccarat, or craps, are exempt from this W-2G rule. This doesn't mean that you don't have to claim the income and pay taxes on it if your winnings are not enough to warrant the tax form. It just means that the institution will not send you a Form W-2G. One thing I want to say here is that it's important to understand that if you are a professional gambler, you can file Schedule C as a self-employed individual, and this allows you to actually deduct costs associated with your gambling activity, including meals and travel expenses. However, it also means that you will have to pay self-employment tax on your net income from gambling. So it's one of those things where you have to analyze your situation and really see what really works for you. And please, as I've already said before, do not forget the state tax operation of things, the state tax aspect of things. The same way you are actually preparing for your federal taxes, You also have to pay taxes. You have to pay state taxes, state income taxes on your winnings. Okay. Now the requirements might be different in terms of deducting gambling losses from your state taxes. So please inquire with your state tax authorities to see which law is in effect in your jurisdiction, because the thing is that laws change all the time, and laws from one state may vary from those in another. By the way, boss, I want to quickly remind you of today's topic. We are having a conversation about prize money, casino winnings, and losses. I want to quickly just go back to the fact that you cannot deduct your losses above your winnings. Okay, this is kind of important to really understand, because it's one of those things where folks are really sort of confused. Now, if you are a professional gambler, though, there are no limits, because if you're a professional gambler, the laws understand that you are actually generating revenue from your gambling activity. So if you're generating revenue, in other words, you're paying taxes to the IRS, then you also are entitled to actually deduct some expenses. Okay. Now, when we talk about expenses, we're not just talking about losses, though. Gambling losses. You have all kinds of expenses that are actually associated with being a gambler, a professional gambler, that is. So you have you can deduct, for instance, the cost of magazines, periodicals, and other data that relate to your gambling profession, the business portion of your interest cost if you wager online, and meals and travel expenses if you attend tournaments and other gambling events. One thing I need to say also is that in some cases, you might be able to deduct things like taxes, employment taxes, or like if you are a payroll, for instance, if you actually employ other folks, if you have a, let's say, a C corporation, an S corporation, an LLC, or a partnership, and you employ other people, and those people are kind of helping you with your professional gambling activity, then you can actually deduct those. Actually, you can write off those as you file your taxes. But it's one of those things where this might require you to actually form a company. Might require to form a company, and you also might be required to actually have an EIN, an employer identification number, and for all kinds of purposes. And it's one of those things where if you have an EIN, that means you are either filing taxes at the federal level or at the state level, depending on the configuration you have for your company, for your professional gambling company. So if you have an LLC, for instance, and you are a one-person show, then you only need to file a form 1040 Schedule C. And but if you are a multi-member LLC and you are part of that, and the gambling activity is actually a team effort, and you actually are set up as an LLC, as an S corp or a C corporation, you might have to file taxes at the company level, depending on your configuration. It's really important to understand that if you really want to deduct gambling losses, it's not just about the amount that you are able to deduct, but you got to really have a few sort of controls and processes in place to make sure that you are really deducting things properly. One thing I want to say here is that you need to keep good records, okay? And it's one of those things where back in the days, professional gamblers used to actually take like, let's say, a paper trail all the time. But nowadays things are so great that if you have you can actually have you can keep your records electronically, and that's totally fine. The IRS allows that, and also the state tax authorities are okay with you showing them electronic records of your winnings and losses. One thing I need to say here is that please avail yourself of any app that can really help you. Like the platform where you actually wager, they probably have an app, and this app will serve as proof of your winnings and losses, because you have that sort of automatic recap anyway that they have to send to you. Now, one thing I want to really specify here is that when we talk about having good records, the question is, how long should you keep those records? Well, the standard practice is to keep records up to 7 years, right? And so up to 7 years when you have a paper trail. But if you're thinking about things electronically, you can keep them forever, really, when you think about it, because the bottom line is it's not really costing you anything extra, but you are really saving yourself, because in the case of an audit and the IRS wants to go all the way to, let's say, 5 years or 6 years or 4 years back, if you have the proper records, you will be able to defend yourself in a court of law and not really go to like you don't have to hire like a third party such as an EA, an enrolled agent, or hire like a tax attorney, or even hire a CPA, a certified public accountant, to kind of help you out. You are able to manage things on your own. One thing I also need to say here is that your situation, your filing status has a big effect, whether you are filing as a head of household, or if you're filing as like if you're filing by yourself, or if you're filing as married, filing jointly. All this configuration will impact your tax situation, especially if you have casino winnings and losses. Let me give you a bonus here. So let's talk about gambling winnings tax. It's one of those things where a lot of folks are asking questions about what they're asking questions about the percentage that you owe on taxes if you actually win big. Now everything depends on the winnings. Okay, it depends on whether you have actually received income from lottery payouts, sweepstakes, bingo, raffles, poker, and other games, as I said earlier, right? Slot machines, casino winnings, and so on and so forth. So the percentage actually goes from 10% all the way to 30%, depending upon whether the income is actually the income is written off against the losses, or whether the income is just reported as an employer income or an employee income. And so what about non-cash winnings? So your winnings might be non-cash, like a vacation or a car. If so, you really must include its fair market value when figuring your income. Okay. And so when we talk about that, and again, everything happens on Schedule A though. Everything happens on Schedule A. So this is an important form that you want to remember. So Schedule A is one form you have to remember. You also have to remember actually a Form W2G. So basically, if your winnings are reported on a Form W2G, federal taxes are withheld at a flat rate of 24%. And if you don't give the payer your tax ID number, the withholding rate is also 24%. So you cannot escape that. And withholding is required when the winnings minus the bet are more than 5,000 from sweepstakes, wagering pools, lotteries, etc., and at least 300 times the amount of the bet. So it's one of those things where you have to really know the rules of the law in advance and see how they apply to your specific situation. One thing I need to say is that, again, going back to what I said, and I've said this multiple times, you also want to, as you're really managing the federal aspect of things, you also want to take care of the state aspect of things and making sure that you are compliant with the law also when it comes to filing your state tax returns that relate to casino winnings and losses. And this is also important, even if the states you are actually reporting to is actually the same state where you actually went to a casino to actually earn money or lose money for that matter. So it's one of those things where you have to also make sure that you are speaking the kind of language that tax authorities and Thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate today's conversation. I just spoke to you about the casino winnings and losses. So here's a recap. So I actually gave you a few pro tips. I gave you a bonus, and now a recap. Thank you so much. God bless you. I'll see you next time. Until then, remember, stay marvelous.